Episode 3 of the Daddiless Issues podcast. The title of this episode, The Beginning of the Daddiless Journey. Mama's baby, daddy's maybe. Today's piece of the puzzle, identifying how your daddiless journey may have started. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Daddiless Issues podcast. I am your host, Dante Brown. And in this episode, we are going to talk about when your journey started. Mama's baby, daddy's maybe. So daddilessness is different for each person. You know, the only common denominator is that your father is absent. You know, he may have decided to never be a part of your life, or he may have been in your life, but was negligent in his role as a dad. You know, he may have left on his own. He may have gotten kicked out. Heck, he may have even died. All of these are just some of the possibilities. And in any case, there is no cookie cutter approach to determining how your journey may have began. So it begs the question, when does the daddiless problem really begin? In my opinion, it starts at conception, goes on through the pregnancy, and continues at birth and beyond. Let's talk about it. Imagine for a moment the day you were conceived. Yeah, I'm laughing. Okay. You know, you don't want to think about the day your mom and dad were getting busy and made you, but in most cases, you would like to believe they were in love and were okay with the possibility of having a baby as a result of their intimate relations, right? Maybe there were candles, a nice dinner, a bubble bath, rose petals on the bed, and a loving partner. You know, there would have been passion, joy, excitement, trust, and pleasure. We call it making love, right? At least that's what we hope was there for our parents when they had relations. Yeah, I called it relations. Now, it may not have been all of that in every situation when a baby is conceived, but a planned pregnancy, or at least one where the people truly like one another, in many ways is easier to appreciate than one that's unexpected. It's just the reality of it. Now, on the other hand, let's think about a situation where, you know, the sex was unconsented to, or where a woman is forced into having sex when she really didn't want to. Think about how she feels, and the environment is different. Imagine there's no pleasure, probably pain, fear, anxiety, a bunch of mistrust, and tons of other negative emotions related to this moment. Or maybe there was this other situation, a one-night stand that resulted in pregnancy. This was supposed to be fun. It was supposed to be a hookup in the back of the car in front of your parents' house. Or, maybe it was just hooking up for the joy of hooking up. Mom and dad getting busy in the Burger King bathroom. Obviously, not all the circumstances are the same, but we need to keep in mind and recognize that, our parents' intentions and thoughts and feelings during the moment of our conception was and may still be of critical importance in how things play out in the weeks, months, and years to come. Do you think the circumstances surrounding your mother getting pregnant translated into her emotional state when she was carrying you? I want to hear from you. Now let's think about another scenario. Picture a guy who didn't seriously think about the consequences of his actions when she got pregnant. He talking about, I wore a condom, so I wasn't expecting her to get pregnant, or my pullout game is strong, so she definitely wasn't getting pregnant by me. So does he want to have the baby? Probably not. What's it going to cost him if she does? Will either of them have to sacrifice their future plans? All these scenarios. Now, obviously, these things can boil over into their relationship and how the baby is treated in the womb. Now, I want you to note, it may be even worse if they aren't or weren't in a relationship at all. So what about the impact of these emotions on the growth and development of the child while it's inside of her? What about you? Did it affect you as you were growing in your mother's womb? Do you think an unborn child's, an unborn child feels what their mother feels? We know that they can feel the physical impact, but what about the emotional one? How does that play? And let's also consider the mother's attitude towards the baby inside of her and whether or not, she's taking care of herself while she's pregnant. If she doesn't want the baby, she may not even eat right or wear the proper clothes or anything. So how would this attitude affect the baby? There are so many different worries when the soon-to-be parents are adults versus teenagers too, right? Consider how things might play out if there is a girl and a guy who are just teenagers. Obviously, there's other worries about how their parents will react to the girl being pregnant. Will they support her? Will they kick her out of the house? Will they be able to finish school? What will her future be like? Are they able to tell their parents, or, does she have to hide the pregnancy from her parents as long as she can? How will they provide for the baby, once it's born? All this stress and chaos. We already know what stress does to our bodies, but think about how it affects and is amplified for a pregnant girl. We've all heard the stories of young girls, having babies in school bathroom toilets because, they hid their pregnancies from their parent. In some cases, the girl didn't even know what to do. Tupac made a song about it. Brenda's got a baby because, Brenda had a child and threw it in the trash after it was born. And in the song, he pointed out the girl didn't even know what to throw away or what to keep. The secret child can absolutely create problems for everybody involved. But imagine being told that your mom left you in a trash can or on a neighbor's doorstep or in front of a firehouse. The pressure of the alleged father not wanting to be involved can definitely influence the decisions that, these girls make. And these are all true situations. These are extreme daddiless problems, but they happen all the time. There are situations where men have, unalived women in order to prevent pregnancies, in order to present a baby being born. So we have to think about all these scenarios, but the impact is still great. So also consider the impact of the arguments that these women have with the baby's father, right? While she's pregnant. What impact does that have on the baby? Him demanding and denying the baby and asking if the baby is even his. She demanding that, she have an abortion or, him disappearing altogether, because there was no relationship in the first place. Or even if there was, they were together and he decided he's bailing out. Being pregnant is stressful enough, but I'm sure the stress is even amplified, significantly if, she has to fight the father, about him being involved or even wanting a child at all. Now consider this, a situation where the parents are married and pregnant. There may be excitement and joy and the child is going to be born. Oh my gosh. But we also need to recognize that a baby doesn't make a family, like I said before in another episode, married or not. So a man still may walk away from his child, even after the baby is born into the marriage. He still may question, oh, is this my baby? Sounds crazy, but it happens. We also have to keep in mind that there is a difference between the relationship that a mother has with the baby when she's pregnant versus the relationship a father has when she's pregnant. A mother has no choice but to acknowledge the baby and play a part in its growth and development. She has no choice. It's literally attached to her. Unlike the mother, though, a father can simply walk away and have no part in the pregnancy whatsoever. There doesn't have to be any figurative or literal attachment to their child in any way. And this is a huge difference. The mother is there with the child day in and day out, at least for 9 months in most cases. The father doesn't even have to acknowledge the child even exists. It's crazy work. Again, that is not to say that she will always take care of herself or the child, but nevertheless, she has to be there. And once the baby is born, This is when things really get interesting. During the birthing process at the hospital, the alleged father again doesn't have to be there. The mother is left to have the baby solo. No dad there to cut the umbilical cord. No dad's name on the birth certificate in some cases. The nursing and caring for the baby on her own with maybe some assistance from her parents, possibly. But again, no present father. How do the mother's emotions translate into how she feels about her baby? How does her frustration and anger with herself and with the father translate into how she deals with the newborn baby? Her body looks different. Her needs are different. Does she have help? Does she have a place to live? Is it love or resentment towards the baby? How do these attitudes translate into her treatment of the baby? Period. How will the mother's attitude affect this baby in the future? Now, if this situation sounds familiar to you or someone you know, please comment. Tell your story as a mom, as a father, or even as a child. Let's talk about it. So, weeks, months, even years pass, and the father is still not present, and in some cases in denial. Once the baby is born, in some cases, this is when the drama really begins as well. In the hood, we have this saying, you've heard it, mama's baby, daddy's maybe. In the first episode, I talked about the ghetto DNA test, where somebody is asked to examine the baby for any resemblance of the alleged father. But today, DNA tests are readily available. But in so many situations, paternity is not established until years after the child's birth. Nowadays, we have so many TV shows dedicated to this issue of paternity. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why so many women want to go on national television and put their dirty laundry in the street. And I'm not saying their children are dirty laundry. In too many cases, we have seen where a mother goes on and alleges that a man is the father of her child. She argues with him all through the episode, and then they come out with the results. And she's been insistent throughout that he is definitely the father, just to have a judge at the end come out and expose her promiscuity. Now, it's embarrassing for her, but think about the impact that this will have on the child. I've heard and seen so many of these situations play out on TV and in real life, where a woman has told their child that this man, who has been in the child's life for years, was their father. They go on national television just to have the child, have the child's heart broken by the actual DNA test that reveals that he is not the father. The man who spent years of his life caring for the child and in some cases being put in jail for child support just to find out that he's not the father. Now, some of these men, kudos to them. They step up and say, well, I've been in their life for so long, there's no way I'm not going to take care of this child. But it's just embarrassing to see it play out on television. The embarrassment and the shame associated with finding out that this is not your father and that your mother looked like some kind of promiscuous woman, loose woman, because she doesn't know how, who got her pregnant. It's devastating for a child. It's absolutely devastating. So it's no wonder that daddiless children have problems in feeling love and feeling value because they don't know what is actually true and what is actually a lie. And if you ask me, these mothers need to stop embarrassing themselves and their children by putting their business out in the street, especially when they cannot be 1,000% sure of who the father is. So, have you been involved in a situation like this? Did a court determine that the man, who you were told was your father actually wasn't? How did that make you feel? How did you feel about your mother? Alternatively, were you the man accused of being the father? How did you deal with learning that you weren't the father? All these situations I would love for you to comment and talk about. Let me know. And then on the other hand, were you established as being the child's father? What did you do? How did you deal with the truth? Let's talk about it. Finally, I'm very curious as to why so many women are willing to go on national television and embarrass themselves. Doing these DNA tests and getting these results presented to the world, especially in those situations where they're absolutely, quote unquote, sure that this is the daddy. Come to find out he really isn't. It's questionable. I've seen instances where the mother has been on television, multiple television shows, repeatedly insisting that one man is, 100% the father of her child, just to be left running off stage, crying in the back hallway after being told he's not the father with a 99.9% degree of accuracy. How do these women see themselves, and how do they see their children? One of these days, these children will grow up and find out their mother went on television for the whole world to see and expose that she was having unprotected sex with a bunch of men. It's already embarrassing enough, to know that your father isn't around, but now they have to deal with their mother being viewed as a promiscuous woman. What do you think this would do to their child's self-esteem and their relationship with their peers? Some women be like, I don't care. I'm a grown woman. I can do whatever I want. Well, just think about your kids for a minute. And again, my question is, why do this? Are they doing these things for attention, or just to say they had 15 minutes of fame? So if you've been involved in this scenario in any way, or if you were on television and had your DNA test results revealed, comment. Tell me your story. Tell us your story. Why did you do it? But again, my recommendation to these women would be, please save your children and yourselves a great deal of embarrassment and humiliation by getting these tests done privately. You're making your child's lives a sideshow. So we'll discuss those stories in future episodes if you do decide to comment on, what happened to you. Now let's talk about another subject. Denial by an alleged or an actual father is huge. This leaves a daddiless child feeling less valued, unwanted, and abandoned. Some men don't even see it. But it lingers on. It's there. And we will deal with some of these issues in later episodes, but the question of why he didn't want you can leave children or a child feeling like they are not worthy. What do you think that does to the child's self-esteem? So just be mindful of what you say when you are denying a child, and you may be very well right. But sometimes there is a means and a method to go about it that can save everybody a lot of humiliation. So just something to consider. So now let's shift gears to another piece of this daddiless puzzle. The issue of mothers having to raise their children on their own. I call it flying solo. The piece of the puzzle is, like I said, it's mama's baby, daddy's maybe. In most cases, single mothers have it rough, I know how things can be, for a single mother because I grew up with one. As I mentioned before, we were on welfare. We struggled a lot, moving from place to place, new school after new school all the time, new apartments, new friends. These constant changes were hard on us kids because, there was no stability. Once you get settled into an apartment or a school, the next thing you know, we were moving again. So it was hard on us, but I know it was even harder on my mom because, she didn't want to take her 3 boys and move them around like this. And she had to care for us by herself. She was responsible for clothing, feeding, nurturing, and keeping 3 boys out of trouble by herself. She was poor, needy, and black, and that equates to hard times for all involved. So having to deal with a child or children on your own, in some cases without the support system, can really take a toll on a mother. The pressure of making sure all the children's needs are met all alone, it can be overwhelming for a person. It's just, an undeniable fact that our women are left to take on this role alone at a higher rate than men. Some women work 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. from the daycare cost to the cost of feeding and clothing children, giving them shelter and everything else. This definitely leads to burnout. So how do you think this translates towards, her attitude towards the father, and even in some cases towards her children? Now, I'm sure there's some resentment and anger and frustration when you have to do everything by yourself. Single moms don't get a lot of credit, but they do get a lot of blame. It's your fault you got a deadbeat. It's your fault you had children in the first place. It's your fault you can't take care of your kids. You should have been more responsible with your body. How could you be so careless? Some of these things may be true, but she isn't the only one to blame. It takes two to tango, as the old saying goes. He is just as responsible as she is, right? So why are so many women put to shame for being single mothers? Now, you also have to consider the impact that this has on the children. If mom is alone, she may never be at home, and the children, have to do things on their own because she's at work all the time. And this leads to some children being alone, in some cases unsupervised for hours. Some kids get into trouble, So many of the kids of my generation, we were called latchkey kids. We saw ourselves off to school. We let ourselves into the house after school. We came home to an empty house. We cooked on our own, did our own homework without any assistance, and in some cases went to bed even without seeing our mother. This is in most cases completely different when there are two parents. In most cases, at least one of them is there and available to be with the kids at some point in time during the day. But when you're daddiless, that's not the case. There are no training wheels put on when your mother's alone, when she's a single mother. You don't get a lot of second chances as a mom. One bad decision can cost you your child, their life. So moms are under a great deal of pressure to get it right, especially when it comes to her kids. And in many cases, she has to build the plane while it's in the air. And after that, she has to make sure it flies straight. That's a lot of pressure on one person to deal with. But if her baby's father isn't willing to be involved, she has to do it all alone. But that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for two parents. The idea that two heads are better than one can really ring true when you're raising kids. So let's factor in a guy that refuses to acknowledge that he is the father of a child. Mom spent 9 months carrying the baby, and now the baby is born healthy and strong, like, Jodeci said. But the father claims it ain't mine. And there's this old saying in the hood, mama's baby, daddy's maybe. Now, trust and believe there are some instances where mothers have alleged that a man is their baby daddy, and come to find out he really isn't. There are tons of shows with it on, like I said, that reveal the DNA. Nowadays, an alleged father can go and get a DNA test super quick. And in some states, it's required before any type of child support has to be paid. But in most situations, when I was growing up, we weren't going out and paying for a DNA test. Nope. We used a good old ghetto DNA test. There was no scientific or established legal basis for it, but it's definitely one of the predominant practices for many folks, not just people who live in the ghetto. You don't have to, you got to think about it. You know how it's done. A baby is taken to see, or a picture shown to the boy or man's, father, grandmother, auntie, or another family member, and they conduct this assessment. The baby's evaluated for some resemblance of the alleged father. He looks like you. She got your ears, your nose, your forehead, your birthmark, your walk, your talk, your laugh, or something they think either runs in the family or related to the alleged father. There are countless stories of individuals who have used this method to establish paternity. I laugh, but obviously this technique is flawed. And it's led to thousands of men being falsely accused of being the biological father of children that DNA evidence later proves were not theirs. So for those men who have been denying, being the father of these children, if the DNA comes back and says he's not, they may feel vindicated and in some ways empowered to continue to deny fathering other children. So if Papa was a Rolling Stone, meaning a man who was sleeping with a number of women, how do you think he deals with any other women who come forward and accuse him of being the father of their children? Thus, a real DNA test is always going to be better than a ghetto DNA test. The real DNA test will provide a mother with credibility and prevent her from potentially humiliating herself and her child by guessing and claiming that the wrong man is the father of her kid. So let's talk about how that can make a child of a reasonable age feel. He's been denying his role for some years, and then you finally get to meet him, and you're being examined like a piece of meat that, has to be certified. How humiliating is it? And I asked in a previous episode to tell you a story. Maybe you're just now seeing this episode. So if you were subject to this ghetto DNA test where your daddy had been denying you, tell me your story. The emotional impact that this denial has on the mother is also at the forefront. Think about being the subject of numerous arguments. Unfortunately, in some cases, there is likely to be a negative association between the child and the relationship with the father. The child is seen as the catalyst for countless disagreements that sometimes are arguments, sometimes physical altercations, and in some cases, it turns into incarceration. The child is the center of that. You have to understand that this correlation between this negative circumstances and this innocent child can't be denied, even if, it may be on a subconscious level. You might not think about it, but there's a lot of negative around these situations where there's a denial and the arguments and all these things associated with the kids. Whether it be related to child support or financial or whatever, visitation and custody, the child is usually placed right square in the middle of it. So how does that affect the relationship that the mom has with her child? There are residual effects of negative relationships or the lack of a relationship with this absent father or the deadbeat father. It's going to be there. You might not see it. You might not recognize it. You may not even want to acknowledge it. But it's an issue that hopefully you will soon, having watched this video, will recognize. So, have you seen the impact of having to fly solo? The impact that it's had on the mother? Are you a mom who is or has dealt with raising kids on her own? Can you speak about the impact that the father's absence may have had on your attitude towards your children? Do you think, should he get a pass if and when, you find out through a DNA test that he's actually the father? Should he get a pass, or should the mothers make him sweat? What do you think? Leave it in the comments. My thoughts on these situations is that, everyone should consider the best interest of the child always. So that's the Mama's Baby, Daddy's Maybe, Mama Flying Solo episode. I hope it has had an impact on you. I hope that has provoked some thoughts for you. And if so, please comment, please like, please follow, please subscribe, but also share this video with somebody else because it may resonate in their spirit too. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. So be blessed.